So Megan, I'm excited today to talk all things meditation, but if someone who's listening in right now is thinking, God, I hear the word meditation all the time, I don't have time for it, or, I don't even need it in my life, what would you tell this person? And maybe what would your advice be for them?
I think it's so important to recognize that your reason for doing anything, more often than not, has to do with pacifying some kind of pain point. So I always tell people, like, you're much more apt to invest your resources, your time, your energy into fixing something that isn't feeling great for you. Some level of the spectrum of, like, it's excruciating or it could be better. So find whatever that thing is. The great thing about meditation, I call it like the ultimate adaptogen. It will show up anywhere. It can show up in your material life and help things get more balanced there. It can show up within you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So find the thing in your life that you want to improve upon, that you want to align more, that you want to balance, and tether that to your reason for meditating. I'm the first to admit that meditation feels like sitting and doing nothing. So anchoring it to something tangible, and something tangible that's maybe not feeling great, is going to be a really great motivator. And it's also something that you will then see an improvement on, which will then affirm, oh, I'm not sitting and doing nothing. And this time that I'm taking away from all of this activity that's drawing my attention is actually worthwhile, because I'm not as hung up on my ex, or I actually didn't drink as much last month when I was feeling anxious, or I manifested this new job, or right, whatever it is. So find the thing that you're wanting to shift or balance or improve in your life, and tether that to why you're meditating.
That's so fascinating that you said anchoring it onto a pain point, because Yasmin and I follow this very popular creator who says, I don't want to meditate because my life is so good. I don't want to stir anything up. So I always thought that was interesting that he said that. I'm curious, from your perspective as somebody who teaches meditation, what do you think when somebody says that?
I mean, I get it. And here's the thing, self-actualizing and constantly questioning, who am I? And auditing your thoughts and auditing, like, the story that you're telling yourself. And it's, number one, it's work, to be conscious. It's not an effortless thing to be awake and aware in the world, especially our world. So there is a fair amount of effort that comes with maintaining that consciousness. And meditation, I always say, is kind of like the mental workout that helps you build that muscle of awareness, so that when you're doing those heavy lifts and navigating the world and navigating our world, which is, again, especially heavy right now, it doesn't feel as effortful because you've built this muscle. But it's definitely easier a lot of ways to, like, be asleep and, as I
Yeah.
say, like, press the snooze button on your consciousness. And I also think it's okay to not have every day be filled with personal development work. And if you're present, and in your present you are loving your life, then that's great. And meditate so that you can continue to love your life. So I never want people to only be meditating when they are in DEFCON 1, right? So it's not about, like, oh, things are going terribly wrong, everything is up in the air, I need to meditate. I'm meditating this week because A, B, and C. So if there is a pain point, that might be what you, again, like, anchor your practice around. If there's nothing happening that feels like that pain point, that moment of, like, oh, this is why I need to meditate, then meditate to maintain all of this expansion and beauty and love and presence and all these things that you're really enjoying. But especially if you're finding it hard to start meditating, I always find that it's easier to look at what it could fix that you would put money and work and time into fixing.
I love that, because for so long, and listen, I am not a meditator. I would probably classify myself as what you just brought up as, like, the crisis meditator. Like, if
Yeah.
something's going wrong, I'm like, all right, Kaya, I
You're
need to,
like,
like, do therapy. I need to sit there. Like, let me get back. I have been pretty consistent with my gratitude journal, but sitting in silence has been very tough for me. But I do it when things are tough. And, there's some seasons in your life. I know, Megan, we were talking about this before podcasting, like, personally things are going on, professionally, and as we get older, just life gets more complex in the most beautiful of ways, that I'm finding myself wanting to lean into it even more and more. And what's interesting, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is I think I had this preconceived notion that meditation is like, you got to wake up at 5 a.m, like all those CEOs, spend an hour, sit there,
Yeah.
but meditation can actually be done in so many different ways. So if someone's listening, they're like, you know what, Megan, I have kids at home, I have a full-time job, or I'm just busy in my life. Like, what could be other options for them to really get like tip their toe into it?
Yeah. There are so many ways to meditate, so many types of meditation. And I always like to classify, you can practice being mindful all day
Yeah.
long. Like Kaya can mindfully drink out of her water bottle and like notice the texture of the water bottle in her hands and the way the water tastes and the whole journey of her swallowing that glass or that drink of water, right? You can mindfully play with your kids. You can mindfully run. You can mindfully drive or, walk your dog, right? Some of the most meditative moments I have every day are when I go for walks with my dog because I'm just there with him and feeling my feet on the concrete and looking at nature and looking at flowers. And that's being really mindful. So you can be mindful all the time. You can also practice meditating, which takes you a little bit deeper into accessing higher levels of consciousness via different brainwave states and things that you can't necessarily get when you are awake and walking around, right? Which is an added benefit and a different benefit. And also with that, that can look like whatever it looks like for your life. So if that's not meditating at 5 a.m., that's not meditating at 5 a.m. Maybe it's meditating after your kids go to school before you do what you have to do, or after everyone has dinner, you take 10 minutes and step away. So it's really like finding the thing, the amount of time, the practice, the way that it looks sustainable for you.
I love that because I think that there's all these different classes of meditation, and there are people who are fanatic about their type
Mm-hmm.
to the point where they think it's the only option. I remember communicating with someone, they had just gotten back from Vipassana, so like a 10-day silent meditation, which has so many benefits for people if it's the right thing in their life. And after that, they are asked to do an hour meditation in the morning and an hour in the evening. And I had mentioned something to them. I had just done a meditation course with our dear mutual friend, Light Watkins, and it's more based on 20 minutes of meditation in the morning. It's a little bit, less restrictive around that. It's transcendental meditation. And I brought that up to this person, and they literally said to me, well, there's no benefit there. You have to do an hour in the morning. You have to do an hour in the evening. And I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that can be such a turnoff for people who feel that it's overwhelming to start meditating, to hear those types of things, that it has to look a certain way, it has to be a certain way, it has to be a
Yeah.
certain amount of time. And for you to say that, no, it doesn't have to look a certain way. There are so many different options. I think there's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah. And it should be an enjoyable, comfortable practice in your life. I don't have very many things, slash, I don't think any at the moment that in my life that I don't enjoy doing or that I haven't gotten around to enjoy doing, right? The things that we don't want to do generally are the things that are the first to go when we feel too busy and overwhelmed and where all those easily accessible excuses show up. So your meditation should be comfortable. The way you're sitting should be comfortable. How you're practicing it should be comfortable. And it doesn't mean you can't be committed to it, and it doesn't mean you can't say it's my intention to meditate every day, because I know that one of the things I want to balance is being less reactive with my kids, let's say, and being more patient with the people in my life. And so you meditate every day, and that's like the intention to be more patient, and that's why you're meditating, and that's what you've connected it to. And if you miss a day, like, guess what? The world is still turning, and like the birds are still chirping, and like everything's still existing the way that it did before. And you can always meditate the next day. So I think there has to be, a commitment, but also a level of comfort, and to recognize that this is a practice that you're going to have a relationship with. And that relationship will look different in different moments of your life.
I love that. And I think for me, like what I've gravitated towards, the silent meditation's tough. I love guided meditations. Like if I
Mm-hmm.
feel inspired, and kind of like what you said in the beginning, you go in with a pain point, but you feel good afterwards. And I had that like feedback loop. I'm like, oh, I really like this. And now in this phase of my life, what I've actually been getting into, and sometimes I'll do this throughout the day, even in 5-minute increments, is breath work. Like I kind of have been a little bit better at being more mindful. Oh, okay, I'm feeling a little bit more overwhelmed. okay, what tool
Mhm.
can I use? And breath work has been powerful. And I know you've said that, breathing is just such a good way to anchor you back in the present. So I'd love to maybe
Yeah.
hear your thoughts around breath work, because I think it could be so powerful for people to do, like even starting today.
Yeah, your breath is great for that reason. Your breath is always here. Your body is never like, remember that great breath back
Yeah.
in 98 or future pacing to it, right? Your body is present, your body is nature and there's no rigidity, there's no constriction. None of those things are there. So your breath will always instantly bring you back here. Your breath also has the ability to do things like calm and pacify your nervous system, which helps when you're kind of in that future paced setting where you're feeling anxious about something. So not only will it bring you back present moment where generally speaking the sources of your anxiety and your stress don't necessarily lie, the things that we generally worry about are things that exist in the future potentially, or what we've created in our mind might possibly exist in the future. And your breath is always going to be right here. And your breath is also really neutral. So many things have the ability to kind of trigger us and activate us, and your breath and the sensation of your breath, counting your breath, most breath, techniques when it comes to like tools involve counting, whether it's like a 16-second breath or a 4-7-8 breath, and bringing your mind back here, giving your mind something to focus on, like counting, is just entering into the chat a lot of neutrality, right? Counting doesn't generally activate or trigger us. Resting with the sensation of your breath, like all of those things are very neutral, and it just gives you a chance to redirect where your mind is. We all know that someone saying to us, "Oh, well, just don't think about that thing." You're like, "I'm really worried about this." Well, just don't think about that. Right? If I told you you can think about anything in the world except for this one thing, all you're going to do, of course, is think about that one thing. But if you can just redirect where your mind is without making that one thing wrong, then all of a sudden there's a little bit of a pattern interrupt, which I think can be hugely helpful, especially as we're talking about navigating a big feeling, navigating anxiety, navigating stress.
Yeah, talking about our thoughts, something that you said on your Instagram that I recently saw was whatever you're thinking about right now is something you're voting on. I thought that was so powerful. Can you talk about what that means?
I ask myself, I'll say that, or I'll say to myself, if the thought I was having was a stock that I was buying, would I be happy with what I'm investing in? Right? Because everything that you think is like a little piece of energetic equity that you are investing into some potential outcome. And it might be an outcome of how you're feeling. It might be the outcome of a situation in your life. It might be the outcome that turns into what you're buying or saying yes to or dating or choosing, right? Anything in your life, the next choice that you make, the next behavior that you take. And everything that you've ever done, said, chosen started as a thought, every single thing. And so if you can start to audit and bring more discernment in here first, all of a sudden your external world becomes so aligned, so intentional, and you become the architect of what you see around you instead of just letting your mind be on the autopilot that most of our minds are, unless we're doing some kind of work like meditation, and having the same thoughts over and over, making the same choices over and over, desiring the same things over and right. It's a total conditioned loop that you have the ability to you know, step away from. You can get off that ride. And just by noticing your thoughts, which again is not a casual thing, until I started meditating in my mid 20s, I had no idea that I didn't have to believe every thought I had. Right. So, like, most people are just walking around believing every thought they have, letting every thought have a turn in the driver's seat. And if I allowed every thought that I had to be in the driver's seat of my life would be a shit show, because we all have those thoughts that do not serve us, that do not serve our relationships, that don't serve our bank account, that don't serve our job, right? We all have those conditioned thoughts that we have carried into adulthood. So if you can start to practice noticing what you're thinking about, then all of a sudden it just becomes a choice. And you can say, do I want this thought to have power in my life? And then all of a sudden, when you have that one thought that definitely you do not want to have power in your life, you can question it and you can say, okay, what do I want to do with this thought? Is there anything that I can learn from this thought? Do I just want to redirect my mind and focus on something else right now? And you'd be surprised at how quickly doing that will completely shift what you see around you.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's that we were talking about it earlier this week that quote is like, who am I without this thought, or who am I without this story, is so powerful
Yeah,
to me, because I think sometimes we hold on to those thoughts, right? Like they're teddy bears
totally.
that give us comfort or something.
Yeah.
I have to hold on to it. I have to give it power because it's there. But just bringing some questioning to it can help to remove some of that power.
Especially the thoughts that like feel really true. Like the
Yes.
ones where I'm like, absolutely 100, and those are the ones that I especially try to question and I just like take a step back from. And it's like, like that's really interesting. Like, where is that thought coming from? What part of usually my like dysfunctional story is that thought serving? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, and I say all this because normally we don't have an inappropriate relationship with the better thoughts, right? Normally the thoughts where we're like, I can do
Yeah.
anything and everyone
Yeah.
has my best in their heart, right? Like normally those aren't the thoughts that we're having like a toxic relationship with. Normally it's the ones where we're, it's the self-limiting beliefs and it's the judgments of others and it's the judgments in our relation, right? Normally those are the ones that tend to get in the way.
It's actually funny that you mentioned that, because I'm doing EMDR and I asked the therapist, why is it that some people are more in fear-based thinking, and then some people, like my husband, literally has like puppy dog thoughts in his mind all day,
That is
or like
so cute, Kaya. That's
something
like
will
true.
be like a huge thing could be coming up that I would consider to be, oh, this is scary, or this is, and he's like, oh, I'm not even thinking about it, and I'm like, what?
You're like, you're an insane person.
Yeah, you're an insane person. And so I'm curious, I think some people, maybe they're born that way, maybe it's nurturing, or whatever it is, but how does meditation help us to kind of move out of fear-based thinking?
Well, so that's called your set point, basically, the way you see the world. And your initial set point for the world is set when you're young, 7 or 8 years old. And I always like to give the metaphor of like, it's at that moment that the world gives you a set of prescription glasses. And the lens is tinted with whatever you were taught. So if you grew up with parents and your community around you and your teachers and your friends saying to you all the time, let's look for the good, right? If you grew up with the community that Anthony did with puppies and rainbows and hearts and possibilities and like there's always a silver lining, then that's the lens that you're going to see through. And that lens, as you get older, just gets thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker, which is why it's so hard when you get older into adulthood to change. It's not that if we don't all see puppies and rainbows and possibilities, it's not that we don't want to see that. It's literally that when we look through our glasses, we see a totally different picture than he does. And so if you weren't raised with that lens, or you just recognize that there are parts of your story, parts of your conditioning that aren't working, you can do things like meditation to literally change the shape of your brain and change your set point, right? So I like to say that every time you meditate, it's almost like shaving away a layer of that lens until you get it back to the point where you were when you got here, which is puppies and rainbows and possibilities and right and all the things. I very much changed a lot of my set point. I grew up very like New York, Irish, like let's just indulge in our misery in a very self-deprecating, jaded, cynical, charming New Yorker kind of way. And at a certain point, I realized that didn't work or feel great, and that I wanted to be more genuine and more authentic and more positive. And as I became aware of that intention and I started meditating, very naturally, I started to become that person that when you looked around, I saw, okay, like what's not wrong and like where can we shift this and like how can we get, and it happens pretty naturally because you have the ability to return more to that natural state of who you were, as they say, like before the world told you who you should be.
I love this. You actually said something on your Instagram that has come up between me and my husband a lot, because
Really?
you call it a dysfunctional superpower. And for me, the
Oh,
state
yeah.
that I'm in is I'm very mindful of my thoughts. But I think what I love what you mentioned is sometimes don't put too much weight. I'll question like, why am I thinking this way? Or, my natural tendency is like to overwork. And I'm kind of unpacking that, like, why, where does that come from? And I have a lot of discussions with my husband because we're always just questioning life and things, like if you're in this house. And he's like, don't be so hard on yourself, because so many of those qualities that you're hard on yourself on is a reason why you switched careers and you were successful. You got a business off the ground. And I'm like, I appreciate you sharing that, because we could be so hard on ourselves for some of these dysfunctional personality traits or thought patterns. So I'd love to get your perspective, because I love how you called it a dysfunctional superpower.
Your dysfunctional superpower. Yeah. So we all have the things that, to the extent that we have lived in them, don't serve us. So your ability to like focus and put your nose to the grindstone and like have, blinders on to anything other than the thing you're working on, to the extent that maybe you've experienced it, is an imbalance that you can like rein in. And maybe there's some work you do about embracing the idea of rest, and like pausing is not threatening or unsafe, right? So that's something that you can unpack and deal with. But you also have this massive muscle of focus and determination and drive and goal setting and confidence around executing, even if you don't necessarily know everything right away, right? You have all these skills. I have done a ton of work around codependency, because I grew up massively codependent, and that actually showed up in the relationship that I'm in currently. When it was in my life, I was like, oh, like a year in, I realized I had very much like relapsed into a codependent pattern with him, and I hadn't been in one in a decade. It's a convenient part of dating people that are non-committal. When you finally do have like a partner, you're like, oh, stuff comes up. Great. Okay. More work. And so I had to like dive back into that work. So I think whatever your like core things are, there's always an opportunity that will come in for you to go deeper into your relationship with that thing. So for you, it might be being a workaholic, right? For me, it might be codependency. And to Drew's point, there are gifts that come from those dysfunction. So I'm really attuned to people's needs. I'm really good at anticipating needs. I'm really sensitive to other people's energy. When it's imbalanced, that looks super codependent and unhealthy. When it's balanced, I can hold space and like hold the container of a room and connect with people really quickly and build really authentic rapport. Those are some of my favorite things about myself. So it's not about getting rid of all of you. It's just learning where to like rein in the parts that have gone into the spectrum where it's not necessarily working.
So what is codependency? Actually, this is very timely, because I know this is a little tangent, but yesterday me and my coworkers were all talking. They brought up this idea of codependency. A few definitions were thrown around, and I said, to this day, I don't know what it is. I don't get it. The idea that somebody being unhappy or happy impacts our happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have that. Like, if my daughter,
I have that.
I'm unhappy, but so it didn't quite add up to me. And I think it's a term that I hear quite often. So I'm curious, what's the definition?
I mean, I don't know the clinical definition, but I think I always define it as, and essentially it goes into equanimity. So like equanimity is the positive side, and having, the other end of the spectrum where you have such a grounded sense of yourself and of your center that the external waves don't really move the needle too much. Of course, you can be aware and sensitive to others and be empathetic or compassionate, but the outside stimulus and other people's ripples don't really move your core too much. And then the other end of the spectrum for me is codependency, which is my sense of well-being, my sense of self, my sense of worth. You could say my sense of happiness, but I go even deeper than happiness. And it's really like my sense of safety, and like the level to which I feel okay within myself is directly tethered to either how you're feeling or how you feel in relationship to me. And so that's where you get into that context where all of a sudden I'm walking on eggshells around you to try to manage your feelings. All of a sudden I'm taking ownership over how you feel. All of a sudden I'm abandoning myself, my needs, my wants, my truth in favor of constantly appealing to whatever it is that you might need. Because if you're not good, I'm not good. To like the nth degree. And again, all of those things could be a part of a really healthy relationship, right? Being attuned to your needs and your wants and being flexible, right? All those things in a balanced way could be great. But when you take it to that extreme, then all of a sudden I'm lost in that,
Yes. Yeah.
equation.
Well, this is a podcast that is primarily for women. And when I hear all those things, I'm like, there has to be a biological, physiological aspect to this.
Uh-huh.
It starts, I think, just with the fact that we all have wombs and we
Mm-hmm.
carry a child, right? And that child is like dependent on us.
Yeah.
So I imagine that it almost exists on a spectrum, especially for women.
Well, I think women too, especially, have categorically been bred to please. Like so many women are people pleasers, which is kind of I think the step before you become codependent, like being
Yes.
a people pleaser and feeling uncomfortable saying no, feeling uncomfortable letting someone down, feeling uncomfortable disappointing someone, right? So I think most women, historically speaking, the sort of stereotype is that we're raised to kind of go with the flow and like move and shape shift ourselves to be whatever someone else might need, or right. So I think that's, unfortunately, yes, a lot of how we can be bred, and kind of like conditioned. I think there's probably way more codependency with women than there is with men.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Another thing that you brought up before that I'm really interested in unpacking, especially now that I'm doing a little bit more of a normal sort of regular therapy, is our relationship with the past. Eckhart Tolle said, and it's a quote that sticks out to me. I remember it all the time. I remember the first time I read it, it baffled me. He said, I rarely have use for the past. I rarely think about it. Something along those
Mm,
lines. And so much of what people unpack through mindfulness, through meditation, through therapy, things come up, right? Things from our past that define us, that form our core beliefs. You said a lot of when we're a childhood, all of that,
that's
like
that
in our
point.
childhood,
Mhm.
a lot of, yeah, that comes up. So how do you view a healthy relationship with the past? And at what point does it interfere with our current goals?
Yeah, I think we, left unregulated, do a lot of dysfunctional daydreaming and unproductive daydreaming. And anytime you move from what's happening right now, you are moving to a moment in time that does not exist, whether that's in your past or in your future. None of those places exist. Your past, of course, did and was a real thing, but isn't there anymore. We can't go there in our bodies. And your future for sure doesn't exist yet and might never exist in the way that you're anticipating it in your mind. So anytime you leave your moment, you are leaving the only place that is real, the only place that you have any tangible power in, and going somewhere else. Now, I think there's so much value in looking back and learning. And to your point, looking back, especially in the context of therapy or reflection, journaling, whatever it might be, understanding where you came from, understanding what shaped you, understanding what core experiences have like a foothold in your identity, and questioning, like, am I holding on to things that do not need to be in this present moment with me, whether that's an anger or resentment. A lot of times, those are the things that get carted with us from moment to moment into our future. And that's great. And I think once you've done that work, it's really powerful to limit yourself to how long you do that, like unproductive daydreaming, you know? And same thing with the future. I'm all for setting yourself up to succeed and looking ahead to plan, to, formulate next steps, all that. Once you've done that, looking ahead is oftentimes really unproductive and sometimes really disempowering, because, again, not unlike when we talk about getting kind of stuck in the loop of a feeling, we don't normally future pace and get anxious about how great everything is going to work out. I don't think anyone's going down the rabbit hole of like obsessive thinking around how blessed they are and how much money they're going to have and how successful they're going to be and how healthy they're going to be. And right, that's not normally where we go with our mind. So I think it's really, really vital to have a lot of discernment around how often you're going to those two places, because they're not real and they're taking you out of the thing that is real, which is right now and whatever's in front of you right now. That's why when people, teachers would say, Deepak Chopra used to say this all the time, we'd be at like a conference and he'd look out and he would say, you're all the most important people to me because you're the only thing that's real. And it's really incredible when you have that mentality, and when you're with someone that has that kind of presence, you can feel it. When you're with someone that is with you and looking at you and connecting with you as if you're the only thing that exists, because you are, it's remarkable. Like when you're actually in your time, how long your days feel, how potent each moment feels, how potent your interactions feel, and it's because you're not watering down your life by leaving it all the time.
Yeah.
That's why, playing with a kid. Okay, I bet you
Yeah.
notice, like when you play with your daughter, time goes slowly, probably
Yes.
too slowly sometimes, but time goes slowly because you're just like there. Like
Yes.
5 minutes, if you're in 5 minutes, if you're in your time, 5 minutes is like a long time.
Yeah. And vice versa. I've definitely been that person, like being next to someone or near someone whose wheels are just turning and you feel it, right?
Oh,
Like, especially
Yeah.
an empath, or, you pick up on other people's energies. It's like excruciating to be
Yeah. Yeah. It's
there.
palpable. And so that, one of the things that helps with that naturally is, spoiler alert, meditation. I want everyone to meditate, but it does change. Again, it can change the shape of your brain and change, especially the amount of activity in your default mode network, which is a big part of what that monkey mind is, where you're kind of ruminating and constantly like leaving the moment and going back and going forward. Meditators are just naturally a little bit more present. And then you have the added bonus of the awareness of where you're going, so that when you start to unproductively daydream, you can say, oh, wow, I'm doing it and I'm going to come back here.
Speaking of Deepak Chopra, he's such a fascinating person to so many of us. And I remember watching a documentary about him, and he was about to go on camera, and his son asked him, Dad, do you ever get nervous? And he said, What is nervous? Like, what is that? What do you mean? And I was like, holy crap, I am so envious of this person right now. Obviously, it comes with years and years of practice. But to get to that point where you are so present, you're so in the moment, like you said, he told the crowd, you are the most important people right now. Gosh, that was like a point in my life where I thought somebody could get to that point where they're like,
yeah.
what? Like, I don't even, that's not on my radar.
Yeah, I think that also comes when you're so locked into dharma, to purpose. And one of the most remarkable things that I've ever experienced is being able to teach meditation, talk about meditation, and do this thing that I love doing more than anything else, and feeling that flow of energy that comes when you are being in service of your purpose, your dharma. In Vedic philosophy, your dharma is really like a twofold path, one of which is to arrive here and to remember who you are, right? So move beyond your conditioning and remember who it is that you really are. And then from that place, ask yourself, how can I serve with the unique gifts that I have, been given, that have been, uniquely co-created within me? How can I be of service? And when you find an access point to that, it's wild. Like the amount of energy and like clarity and focus that can flow through you. When people say, I'm like downloading and being the vessel for the message, right? Like all that stuff casually, no big deal. That's a really powerful thing. And it's really hard to feel anything other than that when you are plugged into that. That's why I think it's such an important thing for people to connect with.
For so long in most of my 20s, I was dying to find what that is. Finally, when I hit 30, I was like, gosh, the one thing that always comes to mind in all my past experiences is women. Why are there no women in the room? And that's kind of how the podcast started, and that's how Bia started. And I feel like just being in your dharma, things started to really open, like synchronicities. And I know you call them like meaningful coincidences. Like this business I have started is truly, there's a higher power. Honestly, we talk about it all the time. And I think it's so powerful with what you said. So if someone's listening, and I've definitely been there for many years, or like, gosh, that sounds so amazing, I want to be in my dharma, I want to really feel like what really gets me excited and energizes me, what would you tell this person? Like, how do we kind of get clear on what that is for us?
I think what's your purpose is a very intimidating question. So I always say, like, don't start with that,
True.
Start with noticing and like auditing your life and your moments for the times when we'll always say, like, when you lose track of time. The things that like when you're doing it, you're not watching the clock or asking yourself how much longer. The things that, for me, the things that when I'm doing it, I instantly feel energized and activated. So regardless of how I felt going into it, I have infinitely more energy. I don't know how long we've been talking, but for however long we've been on this, infinitely more energy than I did before this started when I was doing work and answering emails. I'm instantly like activated and plugged into something that feels like it's fueling me. The things that you want to do and talk about and, be in more than anything else. I always say like those are really good access points to a sense of purpose. And also understand that Dharma is going to take a lot of different shapes and forms in your life. It's not one thing, and it absolutely does not need to be how you make a living. I think right now
Yeah.
it looks really sexy to like have your Dharma be the thing, or to feel like you need to make it into like your side hustle and monetize it. And that absolutely does not need to be the case. So I always say, like, remember that.
Yeah. I remember talking to a friend of mine who, for me, I feel that my Dharma, I've been so fortunate that it's all kind of connected. My career, my community, everything has kind of come together. But somebody who I'm really close friends with said, I don't really feel it's tied to my career. My career is just one thing. My
Yeah.
Dharma is my community. I am here to be
Yeah.
like the best possible friend and supporter and like build that community. So it could look like so many different things, a hobby,
Yeah.
relationships, whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be, there doesn't have to be that monetary attachment.
Yeah. And I think it can distill down to being able to do your Dharma anywhere. So your friend could build community in line at Sweetgreen, like it doesn't have to be, I'm
Yeah.
planning community events and I'm doing, right. Like to your point, it can filter and seep out into anything. I connect with a sense of Dharma around helping people remember who they really are. And that can be in a conversation in a Lyft ride, and it could be giving a talk in front of thousands of people, and both of those are equally in service of that Dharma.
Yes, yeah. And I think this is actually really powerful for people who struggle with anxiety too. In functional medicine, we recognize that anxiety is multifactorial. There could be some sort of nutrient deficiency, there could be something going on with the thyroid. There's so many different things that can come up, but I think a question that could be really powerful for people who are struggling with anxiety is asking what's their dharma and asking how can I serve, right? Cuz just
Yeah.
even that simple question can take you out of your own
Yeah.
head. And that's not to say, oh, focus on other people, don't focus on yourself. It's really important to do all the work for yourself too. But sometimes just putting the focus on like, what gifts can I offer to the world takes me personally out of like my own bullshit.
Yeah. And I think modern day spirituality has gotten a little stuck in the first part of Dharma, which is, remembering who I am and uncovering and revealing my truest self. We're not becoming our like best selves to just live in our own like bettered bubble. You know what I mean? Like we're doing that work on ourselves so that we can then go and be in the world as that in service of the world. So I think it's easy to get stuck in that first part, which is like, let me reflect on myself and, connect on like who I am and what I want and what's going to activate me. And that's great. And to your point, self-care and doing that self-work is really important. But the whole point of doing all of that is so that you can then go be a bigger, brighter, more expansive version of yourself in the world to be in service of others. And I think in our, especially in the US, like it's so easy to get caught up in like, okay, great, I'll just keep leveraging my potency to make more money, to be as healthy as I can be, to live as long as I can, right? And I think that's such a misstep because to your point, one of the fastest ways to feel happier and less anxious and better in general is to help other people feel all of those things.
Yeah, so well said.
It's important to not get stuck on that first part of the equation.
Yeah,
I love
totally.
that. I have like
Yeah.
a million questions in this conversation. I feel like we could talk for hours, but and it's interesting because, all of this kind of goes down to being mindful of like your actions and how you feel. And one topic that, even with the Dharma, but one topic that I think is interesting, and it's something that I've gotten a lot better with, is really like understanding, are your desires coming from you or other people? For so
Mm,
long, I killed it in life because of what other people told me what success was. And I was playing that game really well. And then I woke up one day, or no, woke up many days. I still worked for a long time before I figured it out. And I was like, oh my gosh, this doesn't bring me happiness. And I'm completely not filling my desires at all. So I just love it because you talk a lot about this. So I don't know where that will take you in your response, but I think it's important for us to talk about because it's so easy to get stuck into what other people think we should be doing. And I really want women to honor like what brings them alive in their own desires. That's like the biggest gift I want everyone to.
Well, and talk about like being a people pleaser. And again, especially women, unfortunately, fall into that category of like, well, what I want is what you want. And oftentimes that's a massive lie. What I want is really like totally different. And I just don't want to prioritize that. And so again, you can be conscious and you can be considerate of other people and also still be really honoring of who you are and your truth and what it is that you really want. I really like to ask myself, why do I want what I want? So when I connect with something, with a desire, whether it's something little or something bigger, I'll always ask myself, why do I want this? And I'll use the Neil Donald Walsh hack of, is this desire being sponsored by love or fear, which is always a good one. And I generally, as you can imagine, try to stay away from the ones that are driven by a sense of fear. And I think if you can ask yourself, like, why do I want this? If it has anything to do with anyone else, then you just look at that and you notice that and you acknowledge it and say, okay, does that feel okay? Or does that feel like I'm abandoning myself? And again, it doesn't mean you can't be in cooperation with others or flexible, but yeah, it's really easy to manifest desires that don't belong to you and mistaken them as your own and then feel really empty on the other. I think so many people experience that, so many people, create the family and get the house and the car and the vacation home and the summer in Italy. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, but I'm still, it turns out, really unfulfilled. And I think that's even worse, right? When you do all of that and with the expectation of, oh, this is going to make me feel this thing, and then it doesn't. And so I think too, it's important to recognize that your external is not the greatest source of the thing you're looking for, right? It's not the greatest source of happiness or joy or abundance or love, right? All of those things exist within you first and foremost. And that's why when we do things like meditation, just casually mention that one more time as like a practice that we should all be doing. The more we do things like that and connect with our inner world and our ability to see those things everywhere as a reflection, we become less desperate to acquire them as a piece that's going to complete the puzzle, right? Because you already have all the pieces, you're already complete. And everything externally gets to be this beautiful reflection and this beautiful, expression of it that we get to experience and play with in this human form. But none of those external things are the source, including, oh, by the way, like wisdom, and sort, I remember when I first started meditating, I was so like, I'm going to, especially because I started very quickly working for Deepak Chopra. So I had access to like the best of the best people. And I'd be like, oh, I'm going to read your book and I'm going to listen to you. And like, you have the answer. It's kind of like that kid's book, Are You My Mother? Right? It's like walking around being like, do you have the answer? Do you know who I am? Do you know what life is about? Right. And ultimately you get enough card readings and you get enough past life regressions and you read enough books and then you recognize that you have your answers. And it's not about acquiring anything. It's about tuning into what you already have and who you already are and what you already know. And once you connect with that, then everything outside of you gets to be, maybe an access point to it, maybe a way that you get to enjoy it in a more human way, or a way that that it gets to show up in a different form. But ultimately, it's all always you.
I love that because I actually think it's easier to follow other people's like recommendations or thoughts, or even like minor stuff. With my husband, we'll be like, oh, I have, we're both obviously social people. We have a lot of friends and family, and he'll pop out and go see someone. And he's like, do you want to come? And I'm like, oh, do you want me to come? He's like, yeah, you need to think about, do you want to come? And he will never tell me what to do. And he always pushes back that question. And I sit there and I'm like, I actually don't know. And
I don't
but it
know.
forced me to figure out, because it all
Yeah.
that lives within us. But it's easier if someone's like, oh, Yasmin, go do this. I'm like, okay, sure. But like, if we can all practice that muscle, it's really good. And, it definitely is something I've worked on a lot. I've come a long way, but it's still something I'm like, oh, that's a great point. What do I feel? Do I want to be there? Do I want to have this conversation? Should we do this in business? Like, it's so powerful to practice that muscle. So I love what you just
Yeah.
said.
And it's, again, so often that like people pleasing muscle gets so much validation from doing the thing that someone else wants you to do and doing it really
Yeah.
well and seeing their response.
Yeah.
And that's what you plug into for your sense of worth. And that's why it can just be such a slippery slope between that casual, like, oh yeah, I'll do whatever you want, or yeah, I'll do that. If you want me to do that, I'll go do that with you.
Yeah.
Between that harmless like thing, and all of a sudden every time I need to feel good about myself, I have to plug into someone else's outlet and get a charge from them.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to say that every time you meditate, you plug into yourself, and you become like the ultimate charge, and then everything else is just extra.
Yes. Yeah. I've had the privilege of attending a few meditations led by you when I was living in LA. And I mean, I just will toot your horn for a second because I think you're like, I've never resonated with somebody with a meditation teacher more in my life. I feel like you have this balance of being grounded and being present, but also bringing in the humor and bringing in the femininity. It just, I think, really resonates with me. And so I don't want to put you on the spot,
Thanks, babe.
but I wonder if you're open to kind of leading us through maybe a few minutes.
Yeah.
And you say no, but I think it would be a really powerful gift to offer our community.
Totally. Just like a casual, like 40-minute. Is that good?
Hours.
No, yeah, let's do it. Let's do a couple minutes. 100%. Always, always. You don't have to give me an excuse to meditate. So if you are, I know a lot of people listen to podcasts not sitting still like I am, but if you are sitting still, let's just close our eyes. If you are driving or walking, you can absolutely do this with your eyes open, and you can always come back and listen to it again if you want to do it with your eyes closed to get that experience as well. But just beginning to notice what you notice. And I'll invite you to be in that role as the observer without any judgment, without anything about this moment that you're in needing to be different in order to be better. And so just start to notice sound that you hear without any judgment. Let your mind label it. The sound of Megan's voice, sound of my breath, sounds in your environment. And already begin to notice how much more potent your present moment is just by getting quiet and dropping into that witnessing awareness. Start to become aware of any physical sensations. If you're sitting down, it might be the feeling of your body being supported by a chair, a cushion. If you're walking, it might be the sensation of your feet hitting the ground. Maybe you can tune in a little bit more and notice the texture of clothing on your body, the temperature in the air, the sensation of your breath. And I'll invite you to land your awareness with the sensation of each inhale and each exhale. Just start by feeling the sensation of your breath at the tip of your nose. Find your breath there. Find your breath within your upper abdomen, that subtle expansion and contraction. And finally land where you feel your breath at the center of your chest. Finding the feeling of that rise and fall. And then just for a moment here, become aware of that space that exists after you exhale, but before you take that next breath in. Find that moment after you exhale, but before you take that next breath in, and just notice how much stillness resides in that space without you having to do anything, without anything changing about your external world. This reservoir of peace, of stillness, waiting to invite you in every 1.2 seconds as you breathe. With the next few breaths, as you find your way to that space between, just offer a silent, affirming, I am home. In that space between, I am home. With all that in mind, take a long, slow, deep breath in. Sigh everything out. If you had your eyes closed, gently opening them, arriving back in your moment. Two little meditators, no big deal.
Now I feel so calm. I've never done it on a podcast.
Yes, that's
Oh,
just
really? Good. Good.
Thank you so much, Mike, for jumping on here and talking about this is like my favorite topic, everything that we've been discussing. So I'm really excited about this episode, and thank you for being here with us.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm thrilled to jump in anytime you want to geek out about synchronicities and purpose and all the things, codependency, all the things. Thanks for having me.